The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everybody, my name is Chris. Welcome to the vintrace Power User webinar. We'll get underway very shortly. If you've got any questions throughout, please just use the questions feature. I've got Hillary with me sitting in so we can answer any questions that you've got. We're going to cover a fairly broad range of topics today, so we're probably expecting quite a few questions as well, so just let us know if there's anything that you'd like us to look at or anything that doesn't make sense. But I think we might just get straight into it. We look like we've got a few people. Would have liked a bit more, but obviously not everyone wants to be a power user today, so we'll just stick with the faithful people that have joined us. Alrighty, let's get underway. So I guess the first thing I want to look at, just some very basic features that I think not everyone's aware of, but are very handy. So that in the bottom left, you've got two little tiny buttons there. So one's just to open another tab. So obviously you could be working on a few things at once. So you might have a work order open and you want to know exactly what tank you've got available to use. So you can actually just open up a second tab of vintrace, and that will then let you work on two screens. So I could be in the tank map on this screen here deciding what tank space I've got available. But I might be working on a work order over here and deciding, where can I actually put it. So you can have as many of these as you like. Obviously, the more you have, the more likely you are to get lost with where you've got things. But you can go crazy and open a few of those up if you need to. And just next to that little plus, we've got the little online help option. So there's two things you can do here. First one is you can just search for something that you're not quite sure on. So if you're working on topping, just pop that in there and that'll search our support site. And you'll get a few articles there. So something will walk you through how to top your wines or various bits and pieces. So that's probably the best place to start. If you're not sure of something, just do a quick search using that little button, and that'll send you to whatever documentation we've got. And the other little feature there is the suggest a feature option. So we've probably sent a lot of you guys to this feature request forum in the past, but we actually use this to kind of decide what features we'll be developing. So you can see there's plenty of things in there. So the idea is you go in there, you can add a new post in, and vote on other ideas. So you can see we've got various posts with different votes and stuff like that, and we'll sort of update them as we plan to do things. And some of these, you may request the feature and it's actually already in the software, so we'll just let you know on those ones as well. All right, so that's the very basics, but first thing I want to look at now is actually just managing your logins and your user licenses and the sort of different types and things like that. So most of that is done through our address book down the bottom here. To do all this, you need to be the local vintrace administrator. So there's a special permission. So there should be someone at your winery, probably most of the people joining us today, that should have that. If you don't, and somebody needs to have that added, you can just let us know. But without that, you won't be able to make most of these changes, and it'll sort of give you a warning to prevent that. So in the address book, you should see these little options here. It'll vary for different customers. You'll have the managed system users. So if you click on that, that'll give you a list of everybody with a login. So you can see here I've got 23 people with a login in my system. If I need to add a new user, you can use the little add button in the bottom left there, and you'll see we've got add system user. So if you click on that, one of two things will happen. You might get this message saying you haven't got enough accounts on your subscription, or you'll get to another screen which we'll look at shortly. So if you would like to add another login or any other feature to your vintrace subscription, you can click the little option here, and that'll give you a box to fill out to say, what would you like to add. So it might just be, I want to add 2 more logins, and I can add tank control integration, so tank net or vinwizard. If you'd like to add something else, you'll get the list of the modules that you don't actually currently have. And then once you send this through, it'll hit our sales team's desk and they can take a look. The other option here is you can actually view your subscription details. So it'll tell me what I've got. So I've got 22 logins, a bunch of different owner login accounts. I've got all the different modules there that I've subscribed to. So if you want some sort of idea of what you've actually got, that's the best place to go. And you can obviously then request a change and we can look after that. So I don't actually want to purchase another login. I've realized that Mr. Zane Francis no longer works at the winery, so I want to remove his login. So it's as easy as clicking on that entry, and you'll see that we've got this inactive option here. So I can just say, all right, let's take that login out and save that. And now I could go back to my add system user, and I'll be allowed to add that one. So I don't have to keep purchasing new licenses. And we could just have another login there. I'll make one for myself. So with the username, you can do whatever you like. There's no particular format. So quite often we'll just use a basic first initial, then your last name. But you can have one for the lab and just have the username as lab if that's what you prefer. And then we just need to pop in a password. So that can be, again, whatever you like. Alright, so the right-hand side here, we've got a few different roles and a lot of different permissions. So you can go through and assign those as you need to. So if this person's a lab tech or a winemaker, you can select those roles. Operator, if you want to assign work to that particular person, might be a cellar hand or whatever, you can select that. With the permissions, we've already selected some of the basics, so you can see there's things like can do rollbacks, can record large losses. So if you look through there and decide what needs to be entered, just check those. We've got the local administrator option, so that's the one you'll need to actually make the changes for users. So that's sort of the power user one. But we've got other things like viewing costs. If you're a multi-winery facility, whether they can access one or more of those different wineries. If you leave that blank, they'll be restricted just to the one, and you can actually select here to say, I just want this person to only look at that winery because that's where they work. They don't need to see everybody else's information. So once you save that, you get told off for not having a good enough password, so I'll try again. Oh no. I just use the password as password, and you obviously can't do that. Oh, this is embarrassing for the really secure people out there. Who put these rules in? And of course we need an email address. So this is just so we can contact you, send you release notes and things like that, and obviously invites to webinars. So you can just use the same email address if you've got one for a cellar hand that might not have an email address. Alright, so that's adding login. So use the add option down here. Select one, you can inactivate it. If you need to change the permissions or change passwords, you can just click on them and just update the passwords and permissions from there. So the other things you can set up in here, we've got AP owners, so alternating proprietorships, so that's for US customers. So if you click on that one, it'll give you a list of any owners that are marked as an AP. Doesn't look like I've got any. Oh, there we go. So I've got one in here. So the most important part of that, I'll just switch. If we open this guy up, for example, you'll see there's a little edit option next to the owner. And you just want to make sure that the bond you've got selected there actually matches up to the bond for that AP. So when you initially set them up, if you're doing it yourself, you'll just have to jump into that section and say, all right, this is the bond number that I'd like to track all their wine under. And the third type of login is the owner login. So if you're making wine under contract for somebody, you can set up an owner login. So again, use the add option and you'll see a separate entry for an owner login. So these are slightly different to the users in that while you still need a first name and last name and the username, you need to also select an owner down the bottom here. So when they log in, they're only restricted to a certain ownership of wine. They don't have any permissions. They're only viewing things. They're not requesting work orders or anything at that point. So if you have these set up, you can send those out to your customers and they can view their wines and run reports for themselves. We'll probably have a webinar for those owner logins at some point in the future, just so you can get the idea of what they can do and see. So we'll send out an invite for that in the future. All right, so that's pretty much managing all your users in different logins. So that's all done from the address book. So we can move on from there. And the next thing I would like to look at is the import and export of your data. So we allow you to export certain bits and pieces, so you can obviously run reports, but you can then also import that back into vintrace. So if you want to make some changes to something in particular, we can do that. So the first place we'll look is under our winery setup. And I'll start under the vessels folder. And for this example, I'll just do tanks. So you should see in a few places this import export option, and again you need that local vintrace administrator as a permission to be able to use this. So we don't want everyone to be changing all of our data at once. So we've sort of restricted that. So firstly, if I click the little down arrow, it's giving me two options. I can import or I can export. So first of all, I'll export my tank list. So this will just give me a spreadsheet of everything regarding those tanks. So you see here it's got the name, owner, all the various fields. So if there's anything that you need to add in that you haven't got on a tank and you want to do it for all of them, this is the easiest way to do it. You'll see the very first columns is Finex2 ID, which probably means nothing to all of you guys, and that's fine. So just leave that one alone. If you need to change the names of your tanks, you can basically go through, call that T23, call that T98. So you can make the change to the name, and because we've got that ID there, it knows I'm just updating what was called tank 23 to tank T23. If you need to remove a lot of items, you'll see there's an inactive column. So we've got true and false for some of those. So if you want to remove it, mark them all as true, and that will inactivate them. So if you've got a lot of barrels, for example, that you'd like to inactivate that way, you can set that to true. But you'll find that there's all sorts of different fields, so it's more depending on what you're actually needing to update as to what changes you make. So once you've got that done, just save that file to your desktop or wherever you need to. So I'll just put that on my desktop there. And just make sure to save it as a CSV so it doesn't have all sorts of formatting, and we'll get loaded back into the system. And then we can click the import button and we'll get a screen like this. And we can then just select the file that we'd like to upload and make changes to. So I'll find that spreadsheet that I put on my desktop. So where's that one? Okay, so that file is now uploaded and ready to go. So there's two options just below that. So update existing records. So you'll want to check that if you've changed an existing tank. So I changed the name of a couple of tanks, so I definitely need to check that. And the second one is to confirm the headers on our file. So I didn't change them, so they should be okay. But if you were maybe uploading a file from a different system or whatever it might be, there might be certain headers that are spelled differently, and this will just sort of get you to confirm what column means what. So this is what the spreadsheet said, so it had name, owner, purchase date, etc. But you can actually then map it to a certain field in vintrace. So if you'd manually made the spreadsheet and made a typo, for example, you could say, well, I actually meant name. I don't want to have to go back and re-upload my file. This column here shows me just an example of the data that I'd loaded from the first column. So if that all looks okay, that that's what you're expecting, we can hit continue. That'll then crunch away and make the changes to my tanks. If it finds any problems, it'll pop up with something like this. So it might be that you've put in an owner that vintrace doesn't know about. So it might say we can just create that for you, or you could actually ignore that if it wasn't something that you needed to add in there. I'm happy to create those two. And if all goes well, you'll get a message that says you successfully imported all these tanks. If there's any error messages, it'll give you a big list of those, and you can re-download the spreadsheet. So you might get 30 of those tanks in, get loaded in, 100 didn't, and you can then download and try again and fix up whatever mistakes that you made. And if we jump back out of here, can't remember what tank I changed. So you see now I've got T98, I think that's the one I changed. So I just updated the name on that. Obviously you probably make some more meaningful changes when you're doing that, but you can do that on all sorts of things. So it's got tanks and barrels. If you've got an additive list that you need to clean up, because you might not use certain things, you can do that as well. So I'll just jump out of the winery setup. You can also do this under our tools menu. We have an import wizard. So this is something we use to normally set you guys up when you first come on board to vintrace. But this is all the different things that you can import and export. So you've got fruit bins, obviously you have vessels, blocks and vineyards is a good one. And then there's also areas for stock items here. So you can import just about anything, and it'll go through those exact same steps. So you can download all your existing records, or you can just download a blank file and then go through that same process. And the other thing we can also import and export is your dip levels. So there's just a separate option there under the tools and setup to import your dips. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. Obviously the first one is selecting which tanks you'd like to actually add some dips to. So you can use the list option and type in the tank. And you could obviously have quite a few, or you can use a tank search and select a list of tanks. Then you just need to upload a file with your dips in them. So if you download a CSV format, you'll be able to see what's needed. It's essentially just the dip reading and then just the volume, litres or gallons that corresponds to that. So it's just those two simple columns that need to be filled in, and then you can upload that and it will save it against this tank here. If you've already got a tank of that exact same size and dip table, you can always use another tank dip table to add. So if I search for a tank, I could say let's copy the dip table from this tank as an example, if it has one, which it doesn't seem to, but it would list a dip table in there, and then you can import that and it will just copy it from one to the other, so you don't have to download and upload each time. Okay, we've just got a question there which has been answered, but can you update tank information while they're full? So yes, you can update dips, capacities, whatever it is, and it won't affect any wine in there at all. You probably won't be able to inactivate the tank. That's probably the only restriction, I would imagine. Okay, so my next section is just managing some defaults. So from time to time, you have to enter in maybe the owner or your lab or something, and really you're doing the same thing each and every time. So we've got some defaults that'll save a bit of time when it comes to data entry. So again, that's found in our winery setup. And we've got a workflow folder, and in there is our defaults. So there's quite a few settings in here. Not all of them are going to be useful to every company. I'd say the one that definitely would be this vintage. So if you select vintage 2018 every time that you now create a batch code or do a fruit intake, it's going to say 2018 sort of pre-filled into that box. When it comes to 2019, you can click the little star and then update the default, so you can change that each year. If you've only got one lab that you deal with, so you send all your samples there, you could set this lab as a default. So I've got mine for JX2 Winery, so that'll always be selected when I request analysis. If you're obviously sending samples to different places, you could leave it blank and it wouldn't pre-fill that out. Or you could just leave it as JX2 Winery and update it if you send them somewhere else. So you've got the option here for things like the owner and grower if it's all just your own fruit, so that you're not filling that information out all the time. Likewise with your scales, your crusher, your press, your bottling line, if you've only got one of those, or if it's not that important to you to actually record which one it was, you can just save a default and you're not filling that out every time that you're working with those items. So with our defaults, you'll notice at the top we've got a few tabs there. So this first one I'm looking at is the system-wide default. So if I change this lab, it's going to affect absolutely everybody that uses this vintrace. Whereas you might have obviously multiple wineries within your company using vintrace together. So then you could actually say a particular winery has a particular thing. So JX2 Winery would obviously use their own lab. So we can apply that there. But this T Estates might not use the same lab, so they might use ETS as an example. So that would be their default. So you can set things up on a per winery basis, so those defaults don't apply to everybody. And then going down another level, you can actually do it to your user login. So I've just logged in as this test account. So I could say that I want to put myself as the operator, so each time I save work orders and things like that, it's going to use my name and not somebody else's. So if there's certain things that you do specific to your login, you can use this section here. The last setting, or the last tab here, is just the default settings, so it'll tell you where it's getting that information from. So if I scroll down, you'll see, the default for the system is the JX2 Winery. So you can obviously see what field it's using and where it's getting it from. So some of those are being taken from the winery, some of them are being taken from the system setting. Okay, so down on the right hand side here we've got our auto code section. So you can use this for a number of different things. So if you don't really want to type in codes for your batches of wine or your barrels or any number of things, you can have vintrace set them up for you. So you just need to give it a set of rules to say this is how I want them coded, and then the next time you create that item, it will do it for you. So you can either set them up here with the little new button, or we do have a section under the workflow folder for our auto codes. So I'll just take a look at one of those. I've got quite a few here, but if I have a look at a keg, for example, so we've obviously had one created for a keg. So if I open that up, you'll see that it's got the policy type, so that'll be what thing in vintrace it'll create a code for. So this one's going to do it for barrels, but you've obviously got your batches, your barrel groups, so whatever you need to code, you'll select out of that list. Then on the left hand side is how we want the code to be set up. So to do that, you use either the attributes, so it'll give you a list of barrel attributes here. So this one's using the year, but you could include the Cooper, the oak type, the owner of the barrel, if you'd like. And you can then also put some text in there. So this little bit that says keg, somebody would have just selected text and typed in the word keg, and then added that over here, so that would then be an element to the code, and it would use the word keg in there. And then at the end, these two zeros, that'll be an incrementing number, so you'd use this type inc in here, and then just put as many digits as you want it to show. So if I put 4, it'd start at 0001, and then count its way upwards. So I'll just leave that keg one as it is. So we've got a unique number here. So the next keg I create should be keg 35, and it will use these options here. So when it actually comes to creating some new barrels, so I'll go into my barrel section and new barrels, and then I can select the auto code that I'd like to use. So I'll say we're creating some kegs. I want to use that coding system. Fill out the details of these kegs. So I can say they're 15 gallons, and I'd like 3 of them. And I think that's all I need. So I might have a... Yeah, that's fine. We'll leave that as is. So I'm going to create 3 kegs. If I save and I've missed something, so I don't have something filled out that needs to go on the autocode, it'll probably tell me about it. So in this example, I was supposed to put a year for my kegs, so it's not going to let me move on. And I think that's everything. So that will have created me some kegs. So I'll search for 18 because that was the year I put in, and you'll see there we've got 18 keg-15, which was the capacity, and then it's created 3, so 35, 36, and 37. So if you want to add your barrels that way and get vintrace to code them, you can set those up there. Okay, so that's it for auto coding. There's obviously a few various different methods you can use, so different styles of things. These are good ones to test out in your demo database, so you're not wrecking all the codes that you've been setting up in your live version, but they're worth a look anyway. So just another nice and short one. So under our tools menu, we've got just an edit my company option. So this is basically the details of your winery. So you can obviously put your company name there and probably a more useful phone number. You can upload your logo, etc. in here, and then your address details. So with a logo, click this little button and find a file. Then this will be used on all your reports. It'll use that the logo uploaded there, and your address will appear on things like your bill of ladings and sales orders and whatever report you're running. Alright, so now we'll look at the dashboard because it's staring us right in the face. You'll see I've configured mine with a few different charts there. So I've got one up the top. So for variety on hand at the moment, I've got one for bulk wine by winery and vintage, and then just a simple list of my latest bulk intakes. So I've configured this one myself. You can see in the chart, we can't really see a lot of it. So what you can actually do with these charts to make it a little bit more readable is you can click the Pinot option there and say, all right, I want you to disappear. And then you'll see the chart starts showing up a little bit more, so I can uncheck a bunch of them if I wanted to see a specific value there. You can also kind of zoom in a little bit as well if you drag over and say, I want more info there. So that's kind of some of the bits you can do with those charts. The same applies for the pie chart, so I can say I don't care too much about some of those big pizzas. I just want to see some of the older bulk wine that we still have in the winery to know what I need to bottle off shortly. When it comes to the different tables, we've got the option on some of them. You can actually click on them and that'll take you to whatever you're looking at. So this was a list of bulk intakes, so it'll actually take me to the completed operation, and then I can go and have a look and see exactly what was entered into that list. And you can then use the little down arrow here to download that as a CSV, so that'll give you just a list of the dates and the batch codes that we used. So whatever data's in there can be sort of put into a customer report effectively. So this was one that I prepared earlier, but if you like, you can hit the configure dashboard and make changes to your dashboard. So the left-hand side is what I've set up there. There's various dashlets. If you want to add a new one to your dashboard, you can use the little search option and find something in here. So I might want my bulk wine batches, and that'll put it into the list. If you want to reorder them, you can sort of move it up. So I might want that in the top left-hand corner, right next to my saved searches. So I can move that all the way up there. And if I wanted to resize it, you could make it, a 2x2 big square one like my bulk wine by Winery Vintage, or you could make it longer there if you need to. And then when you hit OK, that'll just add that to our dashboard. So it puts that one there and sort of shuffles everything down into that sort of grid format. So one other thing I've set up already is a separate profile. So you see I'm using the default profile, but when it comes to harvester stuff, as I've called it, I can click on that one and that'll change what my dashboard says. So if I hit OK, I've got some things that aren't relevant year round. I want to look at things like my ferment dates. So, what date did something start fermenting and when did it stop, as well as fruit I've received by vintage and variety. So you can have multiple profiles set up and just switch between them during the year, so you don't have to remove everything, then add everything again, depending on the information you need. And of course, if there's a dashlet that you'd like, you can't find it in the list, there's nothing close to it, hit this request dashlet button, and that'll send an email through to our support team. So if you could include things like how you want it sorted, the information that you want included, so we don't have as much back and forth with emails, we'll set it up as best as we can, and then let you know what we've called it. You can add it to your dashboard and take a look. So the dashboard is fairly handy for just getting a quick status on what's happening in your winery. So it's a fairly powerful tool, and I'd suggest if there's things you need to see, just let us know, and we'll add those dashlets for you. Alright, so the next section I've got to look at is just at some advanced searches and some saved searches. So they're fairly useful for getting custom reports or keeping track of things that are happening. So probably the best place to start out will be under our search menu. We've got the bulk wine search. So this will let you search for properties of your wine to either do some work to them or just report on them and see sort of what's on hand at the moment. So you see at the top there's a little save search drop down. So these are ones that have already been created here. So if I click on that list, you'll see there's a whole heap of various things in there. So I could say, as an example, show me things that haven't had a free sulfur run for over 30 days. So if I click on that one, it's going to go straight into the results and say I've got 210 to do, so I better get working. And all that's really done is if I click the more options up the top here, it just added a filter in that I've obviously prepared earlier to say this is the metric that we want to look at that hasn't been tested, and this is the parameter. So I've got 30 days there. I could change it and say we want to put that down to 7 days if that was what was needed. And you'll see the information selected here is what's actually output down the bottom. So I've asked for the batch code and description. In the lab section, I've asked for the free and total sulfurs as well as pH, and I wanted to include the dates. So that's what we see down the bottom is exactly what I've asked for. So you can get some nice output from this search, and then you can generate a report down the bottom right-hand corner using that export option. So you could say, I'd like a tasting sheet or just a spreadsheet of all that information. So I might just create a brand new search now. So I'll just delete some of this stuff. So I might want to look for a particular vintage, so 2018, and I might want to just say all my red wines. So something simple like that you could do, or you can use the add a filter option. So I might ask for the ferment state as well, and I could say what hasn't fermented yet or what is currently fermenting. So I want to keep a track of all that. And then I can take out a few of these metrics that aren't too important. I might want to put in a bricks and a temp in there. So that might be useful to me. And then if I hit search, I can take a look at that search and say, is this something I'm actually interested in? Does this give me all the information I need? And if that's something you're going to be running over and over again, you can save that as a search. So I'll call this one 2018 red ferments, and I'll save that. So that is now going to be in my drop down list, so that I can always run that when I jump into this search. So 2018 red ferments is there. So that's just saved me a lot of clicking around trying to configure a search. If that one is fairly handy, you want to keep an eye on how many we've got. So you can see there we've got 6 in the list. I can use the little pin icon. Say, let's pin that to the My Searches dashlet. So if I jump out of our bulk wine search for a second, and you can see down the bottom there that I've got 6 2018 red ferments. So that's now going to be sitting on my dashboard sort of at all times, so that I know exactly how many red ferments I've got. And you can click straight onto that, and that'll take me into my bulk wine search. So you don't even have to click around for the search options, you can get straight in there. Okay, so you can see this must to be pressed is a slightly different color. So if you want to sort of get some color coding to those, so if you go over a certain amount, you want it to sort of flash up red. So it might be you don't want to have any empty tanks, and 3 is too much. You might want to have that sort of show up sort of highlighted. So I'll jump into our winery setup again. And these ones live under the miscellaneous folder, and we've got our save searches. So this will have all the searches we had in the bulk wine search. We were looking at the empty tanks as an example. So in the top right, we've got these visual alert ranges. So you can set up sort of a range of results, and then there's this status option here. So they're just the different colors. So I think critical's red, the warnings orange, or something like that. You can have a guess around and see what comes up. So I could say 0 tanks to 2. You want to warn about that. 3 tanks to 100 tanks. That's bad. So we want to say that's critical, and that should hopefully flash up red for us. So I'll just save that. Those alert ranges, and jump out of there. And you'll see now that's gone up bright red to say that I've got three empty tanks. So that's mostly used for things like your lab analysis, where you haven't tested it for over a week or so and you've got too many in there. Or the other example is if you've put in some analysis within a certain range that doesn't quite fit what you're after. So those kind of filters in here. So we've got the metric value range that you can use. And we could say if we get an alcohol from 14 to 30, I want to know about it. So you can obviously set up your own parameters there. You can add several filters as well to have a look at that. But that's the kind of thing that I commonly see, and then people will keep a track of that on their My Searches, so that once they know things are within that certain range, they can then use the search to perform some action. So you could do some lab work or some additives and things like that to that particular wine. So that's obviously our bulk wine search. You can do some save searches on the barrel and tank search as well. So they'll just look at the properties of our tanks. So you can do the exact same options up the top here. So I've got a whole heap of these ones. So I might again want to use all empty tanks. So I click on that, and that goes and shows me those 3 tanks I've got there. So if you wanted to look at just the tank information and not necessarily the wine statuses, you could do that same information. So you just set up your search and then save it up the top there. Alrighty, so that's it for our advanced searching. So what I've got up next is just troubleshooting some costing. So if you're running the cost of production for your wines through vintrace, and you want to sort of troubleshoot those, you're not quite sure where it's come up with certain values, and you want to make sure that that's actually correct. The first place I would start out with under the accounts menu is our cost admin option. So this console will give you a list of all the costs added to a particular wine. So you can look up by batch code, you could look up by stock item code. It doesn't matter exactly where you look, it'll give you all those costs. So you can see just today I've got 2 analysis costs against 2 particular batches for $5. You'll also be able to see which particular users put those in. So if I select cost item, I want to look up a particular wine batch because I know there was something a bit strange about it. And then I could put in the batch code of that wine. So that's my code there, and then we'd need to change our dates because I know it happened in the last month or so. So I'll do that, and if I hit search, that gives me two costs over that date range. So it's got one for $150, and I've done a cost allocation here for $1,300. So if I'm not too sure what they are, you can click on the little blue link there, the add costs, and that tells me I've added utilities electric cost for $150, and then this one was done on a cost allocation, so I can have a look and see what that meant. And that was me just allocating my labor costs to a couple of our batches there. So that'll obviously tell you what was added. If you decide that no, that's incorrect, using this little down arrow, we've got a couple of options. So you could edit, reverse, or adjust the date of that cost. So if I realise I didn't need to add that $150 for the electricity, I can just click the reverse option, and that'll be gone. So I can hit the show reversed as well and search for that. So you'll see I've taken that one out. So you can also view what's gone in and then been removed. So that'll fix up our utilities. But for the cost allocation, I might like to edit that cost. $1,300 wasn't correct. So you'll see there, it's put that cost in. It might actually need to be $1,400, and that'll just impact this particular wine. It won't affect anything else on that cost allocation. I'll just give it a reason. And so we can save that one there, and that'll just update to $1,400. So I'm now happy that that's what that wine should have costed. And then obviously you can then run your reports based off what's been in that cost allocation or for that one. You can run reports from here as well, so it just gives you a summary of what's in the table. So you could, obviously do a full history of this wine and spit that out into a report, and then just make sure everything looks correctly that way as well. But you can make all your adjustments and changes in this console. All right, so we've got one more topic before we get stuck into any questions or anything that people have got. So start shooting those through now. But the last one is just a bit of compliance stuff with the TTB. So if you're not from America, you can kind of ignore this one and start writing up your questions. But this one should be fairly short. So if you've got any problems with a tax class, or you're not quite sure about something with one of your wines, you can find out a few things about it. So I'll just use quick search in the top right to look up a particular batch of wine, and I'll just jump into this barrel group here. So first up, we'll see the tax class is not over 16%. It's bonded at Jake's 2 Winery, which is good. If I click the little tax information right there, that'll take me into this tax class details screen. So it has a from and to date, so it'll show me any sort of entries in that date range. If I just change that forward a bit, because I know I've got something in there, so I'll just change that to the end of October. I can see there was a measurement operation on this batch, and the reason was destroyed bulk. So that might raise some flags. Why is that there? Should that be on my report? So you can click on the measurement and see exactly who entered that. So that was something I did yesterday. So whether that's right or not, you can then obviously roll back that operation if that was incorrect. When it comes to looking at operations, you'll also notice a finance/tax tab. This will be useful for your costing as well. You'll see a cost impacts section, an account movement section for those that are using vintrace for your accounting. You'll also get this tax events. So it's basically the impacts of that operation on the system. So you can see, again, we've got that 95 gallons that were destroyed. So that's the first place to kind of track down what events happen to a particular wine. It does have a little pencil icon there. So if I click on that, that will let me edit the tax event. So you can see that big angry warning at the top there. So that's just letting you know that this is only going to change the actual TTB report. It's not going to change the record, so the operation that was recorded. So if I were to change this to 100 gallons, it's only going to show on this tax event and not on the measurement. So if you're not sure exactly what it's going to do, just get in touch with us. But it's fairly handy for changing the tax change reason. So I might have just got that wrong. A rollback isn't too feasible. I want to put it to inventory losses. And then I could just give a reason for the correction there. And that will just update, and that will then reflect on the reports to say we had inventory losses instead of that destroyed bulk option. And probably the lucky last one we'll look at before we have a look at some of those questions is the tax event or the tax class event history. So that's under our consoles section there. So this one again uses that same sort of format, but we could look up that particular batch code. And again with those date ranges. And that will give you a list here. So you can get sort of totals. You don't have to put in a batch code. You could put in a stock item, do it for different bonds, and this will just show you exactly how we've calculated everything. And if you need to, you can then compare it against the actual report. So you can run the federal or state tax reports and the breakdown report as well, which just goes batch by batch and gives you that that volume there. All right, so that's everything I wanted to cover today. So I'll just have a quick look at our questions. So it looks like we've got one here. Can you show how to group individual barrels into a group? I certainly can. So to do that, I'll just have to find myself some barrels first. So we've got actually on the barrel search, we've got a handy in-group option, so I can say, show me some barrels that aren't actually in a barrel group for me to combine together. Sorry, I've got pop-ups everywhere. So if I hit search, that's going to give me a list of barrels that aren't in groups, and I might just look for barrels in use as well to get rid of those empty ones. And you can see here we've got two barrels, exact same batch code, but they aren't grouped together, and that may have just been a mistake, or I now decide I want them grouped together. So I'll just click into this wine. Just got to remember those barrel names. So all you really need to do here is transfer those barrels together. So I can use a many-to-one transfer. And so it's already grabbed that barrel code there, but I could then put the other empty barrel, or the other barrel of that same batch code in. So if I type in my batch in that bottom one, and it was this one. So it says you're in a few different vessels. Which one are you actually wanting to use? So I want that one ending in 7. So I'm now taking 2 barrels here. I want to effectively empty those on a transfer. I'll use the same batch code again on the right hand side. So this one. And I don't want to use any of those vessels. I'd want to create a brand new barrel group. So I'll hit the new button there. And now I just want to make sure I select these same 2 barrels in my group so that they actually get combined. So I'll use the add line option and just type in those 2 barrel codes. And hopefully this works for me. So I'll just mark those barrels as full and save. And so obviously we're not taking any loss. We're not really actually doing a transfer. So I hit now and save and hope that this all just works for me. And there we go. So you see now I've got 2 in my main shed. 118 gallons they're combined, so you can just do a many to one transfer effectively, take it out of the barrels, and then just add them into a barrel group. Okay. So next question is, can you explain the difference between a rollback, reverse, and correct? Certainly. So I'll jump into the history of this one. So basically, with a rollback, that'll be any operation where you might have got a volume vessel wrong. You may have accidentally blended things wrong, so it might affect your composition. So those will be rollbacks. A reversal is generally used for your additions and analysis. They don't have to be rolled back. So if I made a mistake on some sort of analysis, so all the way back here in 2016, we could just reverse that. So if I click view, click reverse undo, and that will just take only that analysis out. So I can say I put on the wrong wine as an example, and that will no longer be in the history, so I don't have to roll back and then get this big list of operations that needs to be re-entered just because I made a mistake on the analysis. It also has an edit option on analysis as well, so if it was the wrong value, I put in 14 and it should have been 14.1, I could have adjusted that as well. The correct option has a few various uses. Just go to another window while that's thinking about it. So with our correct option, I could use, let's find a good example. I'll just jump into a random wine. So the correct option is mostly used for just changing small details. So you see here we've got a bulk wine receivable, so I could view that and click correct. So sometimes you'll click correct and you won't see much that looks like you can change it, but it's kind of worth having a look anyway. So with the correct, I could add a block to this and save it. Doesn't need a rollback to go back and do that, so it's probably worthwhile to check if you can correct it first before you actually make those changes. So I could even say we've got the wrong region there, and we'll select Oakville instead of Napa Valley, and then save that in there. So if you can correct it, it's obviously going to be a lot easier than doing a rollback. So I'd suggest checking that out first on the operation, see if it's possible, and then you're probably likely to roll back at that point. Do you have a bottling record module of sorts for QC tracking? Yes, we do. So we have an inventory module that you can record all your bottling operations. So I'll just look at bottling this particular wine fairly quickly. We'll do probably another webinar on the whole module itself in the coming months, I'd imagine. But you'll get a packaging operation here, so it'll take out of tank, and you'll end up selecting a stock item that you create, so you can have all your dry goods and labels, your caps, glass, all that sort of thing entered into the system, and then as you package it, it'll consume that and transfer costs over to that as well. There's a few extra things on there like recording QA events. You can locate your stock in certain areas, record the different bottling line that's used. So there's a fair bit of information there. If you want more detail, you can just look for our inventory guide on our help site, and that should walk you through kind of the things that we do in the bottling side of things. Right, and another one here is, can you add full barrels to an existing barrel group? Yes, you can. So there's two ways you can do it. So probably similar to what I just recorded earlier, where I did the two barrels transferred into one. You can just do a transfer again of another barrel and add it to the existing group. The other option is actually doing a measurement to add a barrel in. So So I'll just find a barrel group here. So if I did use a little adjust volume option, so I've got 200 gallons in this particular group, but I could add another barrel straight into that group, and then just increase the volume of that group to include that barrel. So that's if you forgot one and maybe a rollback's sort of not that feasible. If the barrel is already full of wine and you want to just move it into that group, again, that's the same as that many to one transfer. So we'd have that barrel group, we'd select a separate barrel just down here, and then when it comes time to creating the new barrel group, just make sure we add all the barrels from the original barrel group plus the additional ones we need to add, and then just go through with that transfer, and that'll all be combined once it's all saved. Okay, that looks like all of our questions. So if there's no more, I think we'll leave it at that. I'll hang around for a bit and hopefully answer some more that come through. So thanks everyone for your time, and we'll be uploading this one onto YouTube, so please look out for that. Just another question popped up. Can you please show how to set up auto code on new barrels? We use a vintage producer barrel number. Sure can. So I'll head into our setup again, and that lives under workflow and auto codes. So I'll just create a brand new one this time. Just call that one barrel. So we need the auto code policy type to be barrel. So the first thing we wanted was the vintage or the year of the barrel. So that'll be the attribute option, and you'll see we've got a few options in here. So there's one for year, which will give you the full 2018. If you just want it to say 18, select the year YY option and add that to be the first thing on the auto code. The next one is the producer. So that'll be our Cooper in there. So we can then add that as the second option. With the Cooper, it won't use the full name. There is an auto code or a code option on the Cooper in the address book that we can set. So if that doesn't come out right the first time, we'll take a look. And then we just wanted a barrel number. So that's where the inc or the increment comes in. And I could say I just want 2 digits to be incremented on the end of that. And so that'll just start at 0 and count its way upwards. And I would like that to be a unique number, and we'll start it. We'll call it 0. The next one will be 1. So if I save that, and then if I were to start actually creating a barrel, so first of all, I'll select the brand new auto code. So I called mine barrels at the bottom. Just fill out the info I need. So my owner, so I needed the year, so have our 2018. And then we wanted the Cooper as well, so if I don't select that, it won't let me go on. And we'll put that to Natalie and say we want 5 of those barrels. So once I save that, so it's telling me I haven't got an auto code set up for that Cooper, so that's where I can then say we want that barrel to say NAD in the middle. And that's created, so I would assume my barrel will be 18 NAD. And then we've got 1 through 5 there. So you can set it up like that. And if any little codes don't appear, you'll get that pop-up box to fill that out. All right, that looks like the last of our questions now. So we'll call that a day and get this up onto YouTube and send you all out a link. Thanks for joining.